Welcome back to Performance Process, everybody. I'm Kaylee Fretz. We got a great show for you today. Something a bit different, right, Ronan? We're not going into wind tunnel testing and things like that. We're
talking to a current writer to start with, which is a first.
Yeah, which is excellent. Really interesting episode with Ruth Edwards. Maiden name, Ruth Winder. Some of you may still know her by Ruth Winder. Ronan, what did you two talk about down at TDU?
Yeah, well, we recorded this in Adelaide a few days post Women's Tour Down Under. Ruth was still there with the Human Powered Health Squad, who she's racing with for this season, as they were awaiting like Cadell Evans' Great Ocean Race. So yeah, we caught up, and it's very much just a chat, an interview, sort of on returning to the World Tour peloton. Very conscious not to call it a comeback. Ruth said it was the past 2 years have been like a sabbatical. She did obviously race some gravel, some mountain bike, the Life Time Grand Prix in that time. Tried a few different jobs like bike fitting and coaching and that, but ultimately decided that she really wanted to come back to the World Tour peloton. And yeah, we caught up just after her first race back.
I'll jump in and give a bit of Ruth history, since she's a pretty good friend of both myself and my wife, and her husband is one of my best friends, and we've known each other for a long time. So I just a brief rundown of what she's been up to. So Ruth's been racing since she was junior, 14, 15 years old. Has gone to the Olympics twice, so went once on the track and once on the road. Went in, I think it was Rio on the track, and was an unused rider in the team pursuit, and then came back and raced in Tokyo on the road. Raced for Trek for 4 or 5 years. Was really at the top of the sport. Won Flush Wallone, has been at the very, very pinnacle of the World Tour. And then, well, for a lot of different reasons, I think the biggest of which was that she's living in the U.S. in Colorado, a long way from where these races were. She did take a sabbatical. She kind of was done with road racing. She was done with the travel and done with being just on the road all the time, away from her husband, and came back, tried to race gravel for about 2 years, and hated it. I think I can say that.
We do get
wasn't
into that,
a fan. Yes. Yeah, wasn't a fan of the scene. It wasn't what she expected, as you'll hear later in the interview, and basically took an opportunity to go back to the World Tour. So yeah, re-signed with Human Powered Health. Was just third at Trofeo Oro in Italy the day after Strade Bianche the other day. Mm-hmm. So she's sort of returning to the very top of the sport. I think that was a race won by her former teammate Elisa Longo Borghini. And anyway, this episode is sort of like, it's real problems solved by a real athlete, I think, is maybe a good way to put it. Like, how do you overcome various things in a career? How do you overcome sort of the realities of being in the wrong part of the planet? All these sort of things. And Ruth's a very introspective and intelligent person, so I'm very, very pleased that we get to hear her thoughts on all this stuff. Well, let's hear from Ronan and Ruth in Adelaide.
Ruth Edwards, welcome to the Performance Process podcast. Thanks for joining us. We were joking a second ago that'll probably be the last time you ever reach out to someone and say, I listened to your podcast, because then that person turns around and tortures you for a week to get on their very next podcast. So I think you're now officially a friend of the podcast. I think that's the technical term for someone who listens and then joins the podcast.
Yeah, I would say I'm a friend of the podcast. I've also done a little work with your colleagues, and my husband is a friend of the podcast too. So
collective friends of the collective. Maybe that's the way we.
Yeah.
We're sitting here in Adelaide. It's your first time back in Adelaide since you won this race. Yeah, what's it been like?
Yeah, it's been really fun to be back. I think in my mind I was like, oh yeah, just a few years ago when I was here, and then I counted that it's 4 years since I was here again. So COVID made things feel differently for sure. But yeah, lots happened between then and now, and I think being back in the peloton was super fun though, just first being back. Last time I saw you, I was very cracked on the spot and just really needed a break. People love to ask me if I stopped too soon or, regretted my choice, and I definitely don't. I needed a break, and now I feel pretty excited to be back.
That's kind of what this podcast episode is going to be all about. I want to clarify first of all, I'm probably going to say comeback quite a few times in this, and it's probably more accurate to say, I don't know, sabbatical or something like that, isn't it? Like it was It was a well-deserved break, so to speak.
Yeah, I think I called it a retirement for a year and then started thinking about coming back, and I guess it was then starting to say sabbatical, which is fun. It's fun that I could make a choice and then change my mind too.
So what did you do with your time while you were away? You were doing a bit of gravel racing. Was that the main focus, or did you have other... Yeah, what did you do?
While I was gone from the WorldTour, I did keep racing my bike in the gravel scene, which is a lot less days of racing. It's more like 1 a month versus 50 race days. And I tried a few jobs, like, I don't know, I was working as a bike fitter. I became a coach for the junior program that's in Boulder Junior Cycling, which was probably my favorite job that I did. And just learned what it was like to not be a professional athlete. I turned 30 last year, and since I've been 14, 15, I've been racing my bike, and that's pretty much consumed all of my life. So it's kind of fun to realize that I can still be a person without just being a bike racer.
I remember something about I think we were driving from like Belgium. It was the first edition of Paris-Roubaix Femme, and we were driving down. I think your biggest fear was that one of the team might get injured in Paris-Roubaix, because then you would be forced to ride Tour of Britain afterwards. And you had very much at that time called an end to your road career. You were hoping you wouldn't have to go across to Britain. And I remember having some discussion with you about how I found it surprising how fit you actually are when you come out of full-time bike riding, and how easily it is sustained. And while we're in full-time bike riding, it's like, and I'm being very specific here to say full-time bike riding, because I was never at your level, but I tried for a long time to be a cyclist. But how much that foundation stays with you? Had you any sort of, did you get the same sensations that actually 1 day of racing per month kind of was enough, and you were just as strong and maybe in some ways stronger?
I think it's interesting, right? With gravel racing, it's not as intense, it's much longer. So I think I kept a lot of this base fitness. I'm realizing pretty quickly that top end sprinty thing that I was pretty good at before is taking a bit to come back. I saw that over the last couple of days racing for sure. But I don't think I actually rode any less hours than I did when I was racing WorldTour. I was still putting in like quite a lot of mileage, because it turns out I still really liked riding my bike.
Yeah, a change is as good as a rest, isn't that the old saying?
Yeah, for sure. And I think just not bleeding your eyeballs out dying. I can just remember finishing bike racing and be like, wow, this is, I go into these things just saying, how can I kill myself the hardest? Like, if I just die and suffer as hard as I can possibly freaking suffer, then like I've done a good job. Like, that's all you can really ask. And I was just so excited to not do that anymore.
Well, do it in a different way.
Yeah. I mean, gravel, I'm not sure I ever quite got to the same point. That's just me personally. I never had the same motivation for it as I did road racing, even when I really tried. But even then, like, there's a difference between doing VO2 max as hard as you possibly can go versus like slowly dying over 12 hours until you literally can't pedal anymore.
Yeah, it's a very different thing. I mean, you said that at top ends you find it slower to come back, but you were right there on Wollonga Hill. You finished in top 20. Were you encouraged by being at that level already, or do you think you should have been higher, or where does that sit in terms of your expectations?
I was initially disappointed, but with a few moments and maybe some food and a little perspective, I was pretty happy with it at the end. Yeah, I think initially I wanted a lot more from myself coming back to this race as a previous winner, and with a lot of motivation to try and do really well. And I didn't even know what really well was, but it was apparently better than, I think I finished 15th on the Wollonga stage. I think it's just that sensation of getting dropped. You're like, oh, I was dropped. Like, like I didn't want that.
So was everybody else, by the way.
And I realized that almost basically everybody else that tried to stay with Gigante at the bottom also blew. And I look back and I think, maybe I learned some things. And in the end, that was the third day of racing I've done since the end of 21, and everything's looking good. And so I was more motivated than discouraged.
Does that give you a barometer for that kind of effort again, and going into the next races now, into the rest of the season? Do you almost needed an experience like that to reset? Yeah,
I definitely needed it. I think we didn't really know what I was capable of doing, and we definitely learned more about that. And then I just look, instead of coming around Sprat, maybe I should have been a little smarter and just stayed on her wheel and not been in the headwind, and just little things like that. And you learn. And I know from my past self that I'm not very good at sitting and waiting. And I remember Ellen Van Dyke, as a teammate once, had told me just to, not go with them when they go and just do my own pace. And I ended up second the day she told me to do that up a climb. So I think just remembering little things like that again and learning what that pace feels like is really important to do.
I don't want to call it a break either. I'm gonna find myself clarifying a lot of stuff here, but I don't want to call the past 2 years a break. You were gravel racing, you were in the Life Time Grand Prix, but did the break from road racing, let's say, do you find in any way that sort of changed your mindset? Do you think that sort of patience that you just talked about there, did you have any moments where you think, yeah, just something switched while you're away from road racing? You go, you know what? Actually, now that I can step back, that's much clearer now how I can do this differently.
Yeah, I think clarity and seeing the whole sport completely differently now, for sure. I'm not sure that gravel necessarily helped me do that, but just time away. And my first year in gravel, there was no expectation or pressure, so it really did feel like a break. So you're welcome to say that if you want. The second year, I tried to put a little bit more pressure on myself, and I ended up having bad injury, and the season didn't turn out to be what I wanted it to be. So maybe just a 1 year break and then a 1 year gravel excursion, shall we say. But I think too, just I had so much more fear when I was racing before because I didn't know what life would look like for me out of the sport. I felt like I needed it. I needed to get another contract. I had to have this life, or else who was Ruth Winder? What was she going to do? What was she going to be? And I left and I went home, and I have an amazing house in the mountains in Colorado. I have the best dog. I have a lovely husband, and a really, really good life. And now I think I just have a lot less fear because worst case scenario, bike racing doesn't work out. And I just go back to that fairy tale life that I feel I have. And some of it felt wrong to leave, but at the same time, I realized how much I love racing my bike and I want to race my bike. And I was trying to make it gravel, but that's just not it for me. So then I thought, well, if I really want to do it, then why don't I just try and do it again? Instead of being scared of this, like, what if I go back and it's not what I think it should be, or again, like this fear holding me back that it did before, and now I'm just using it as motivation in a different way.
It's almost like you've been given a freedom to do what you enjoy rather than what you need to do for the next contract or something. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, exactly. For sure. I really chose it, and I feel like I was telling myself before that I chose it, but there was always something in me that felt like, but I don't know if I really am, because since I was 15, I was successful, and then you go from one team to the next team, and I'm grateful for that, and I'm really fortunate that I have literally never really even had to submit a resume. I would just like go from one big team to the next big team, and obviously I worked really hard and tried really hard, but my career was kind of seamless and just flowy, and really, really healthy and uninjured. So I just never like had a break, or I don't know. I just had. I don't mean to sound like I'm complaining for my amazing career, because
No, I mean,
I just feel like I got to a point where I was like, I just don't even know if this is what I choose or what it just happened to me along the way.
I mean, like, yeah, Tour Down Under winner, Brabant Sapele winner, Giro Stage winner, 3 times Ardèche. You know, you did have an amazing career. Yeah. Did you feel that you could walk away when you could, or was that, with like going back to that 2 years ago, was that a difficult decision first? And in some ways, were you almost like trapped into thinking that you were such a high profile rider, you were such a good rider, that this is what you do and this is what I have to keep doing? No,
when I stopped in 21, I feel like I didn't have a choice, to be honest.
Okay.
I was extremely unhealthy mentally, physically. When I look back, I didn't have a choice. I needed to stop just for my own health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you'd said at the time, it's so difficult being, someone who's not from Europe, having to go to Europe and everything you have to sacrifice around that, and being away from family. You mentioned your husband there. How do you feel about that now? Obviously time has passed. Did you miss Europe? Actually, did that change around in some ways?
I'm not sure I missed Europe more than I just missed racing my bike, right? I think when I left the sport, I didn't love it anymore. I won Brabant Sapele, I remember winning, and I called Zach and I said, I can't believe I did that, and I can't wait to come home. I'm just so ready to be done. And that's just so sad, because it was more a feeling of relief than joy, and I just really wanted to come home afterwards, and that was a really sad feeling for me. And once I got home and I was able to kind of reset and miss the sport and everything, I don't know. I wanted to come back.
Is there anything we could do as a sport to make, moments like that, it's almost like the old saying is, you're only as good as your last race. And you won Brabantse Pijl, if you're only as good as your last race, then you're as good as you can be when you win a race. But the very next race, cyclists, you have to get used to losing. Is there anything you think you might do differently about targeting events and when those goals come off going forward, or anything you've learned from that experience?
I learned a lot in 21 about setting goals and how to kind of have your eye more on a few particular races than every race that you enter, because it's really hard as a cyclist. You always want to do well, and you race 50, 60 times a year. And then I think for me, what I've learned since then is just combining that with more of the joy part of it versus this like need to perform. Now I really want to perform. I want to be the best that I can be. And yeah, okay, when I was the best I could be in 21, that was good enough to win big bike races. So I hope I can get there again, and I hope I can soak it up a bit more than I did before.
There's something I refer to in cycling as too much Eurosport. Where a lot of us are watching TV, a lot of, when I say us, I mean amateur riders and maybe aspiring riders, and certainly I was guilty of it in my day, and we hear Chris Froome or Annemiek van Vleuten or whoever it might be is doing this race for training. And then I found myself at times going, oh, this is a training race, and as such, you sort of, in one ways, I think it was like deflecting pressure, but in another way, I think it was just like an excuse not to really give it everything I had. Do you think is there something about that actually your time away, when you come back, every race is going to be so much more enjoyable, and you're maybe going to race not to win every race, that's obviously an impossibility, but race every race. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And I think that's really important. I think a lot of young riders too, I ask, okay, what are your goals? And they're like, oh, I just want to be good. And I'm like, well, you can't be good in every race because it's mentally really fatiguing. Like, you can't, it's just not possible. So to give yourself that like space for it to just be a training race or something, it's still going to be super hard, but you haven't put that pressure on yourself. And yeah, you can race a ton of times in a year, and if you try and have that on all the time, when you actually get to the race that you really want to try and win, then maybe you don't have enough mental energy left to do that. And there's also not that little edge that you get. For me, when I put that pressure on, it's like this one little extra bit. And instead of just being like, oh shit, like so much pressure, it's now like, okay, cool. Now you get to really play the bike race and see what you can do, versus just kind of giving yourself a little bit of space if you mess up or something goes wrong. Like, you're like, that's okay, my A race is not this one, or it is this one. Okay, well, now you can panic and be mad because like that you put all your eggs in this basket and it didn't go the way you wanted. You're allowed to be mad about it, so I think it's important to not do that every weekend.
Is there maybe a happy medium that perhaps you could dial back the 50 races and do 25 and target a real good result in each of them? Would that help the mind, do you think, or do you just need to be in that competitive environment more often? For
road racing, I think it's important to be in the competitive environment for sure. Just because you also learn so much every race, right? Like here, I definitely was trying to be pretty competitive up there, but I still learned a lot along the way. So if my AA races aren't until the Ardennes a couple months from now, then what I learned today and did today will still help me more than if I didn't go today, or this week, this week. Yeah.
So coming out of this, then the goals are the Ardennes. Is that okay?
Yeah, those are probably some of my favorite bike races. I love Amstel Gold Race, Flèche Liège, Bastogne-Liège, whatever. That one's just brutal. By the time you get to that one, good job after the previous two. See what you can do. But yeah, those like really punchy hills suit me pretty well, and I enjoy them. Right before them too, we have Brabantse Pijl again, so that's a good one. And then obviously this Flanders, which is hard not to be excited for, but my personal heart picks would be Amstel and Flèche.
I want to go back. I want to discuss your decision to return from your sabbatical, and what was the initial? How did that thought come into your head, and when did it first come into your head?
Oh, I think it was recording a few podcasts, just talking about bike racing all the time every weekend.
So Dane's to blame then.
Yeah.
Pretty serious bike racing podcast makes you get pretty serious about bike racing.
Watching them, talking about them, thinking like, oh, where would I be? And I was like, just forget about it. And I said it to Zach, and he's like, no, what? No. What are you talking about? We're not having this conversation. And I was like, you're right, we're not having this conversation.
You were having that conversation.
And then a few months later, we were having the conversation again. And he was like, okay, if you really want to. Not that I needed his permission, but I needed his support, for sure. And he was like, if not now, then when? Because we are getting older and we do want a family, and it's definitely kind of, if not now, then when. And again, kind of facing that fear, kind of thinking, okay, this is something I think I want to do. I was applying for other jobs, kind of getting a little anxious and being like, that I can't ride my bike. If I get another job, I don't even want to ride my bike. And so
I've been there.
Yeah. And I felt like I still had, a lot of motivation to give, a lot of love for the sport. I think riding with the Boulder Junior Cycling Club for the last 2 years definitely brought that out even more, because these high schoolers just want to ride their bikes and have fun. And it's been really cool to be around that and also have their support. And then I kind of put the feelers back out to teams and got immediate interest, which obviously feels really good. And then just felt like it went pretty fast from that.
Ultimately I've ended up now with the Human Powered Health Squad. I'm sure they're delighted to have you. I want to go back to this question again and just sort of talk me through the sort of thoughts in your own head when I want to come back. Is that a great idea? Yes, it is. No, it's not. How did that go?
Yeah, a lot of that. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Kind of back and forth. But I think in the end, I really felt like when I was watching the racing, which was pretty easy to do over the last 2 years, which was amazing to watch so much women's bike racing. I just kept wondering where I'd be in the field. And then I thought, no, it's like, I've done that. I don't need to go back. I shouldn't go back. And then I was like, why shouldn't? And then it was that should word that I hate. I hate that word, should. Like, my psychologist likes to say, don't should yourself. And, if I didn't want to and I didn't want to go back, then that would be one thing. If I thought, oh no, the travel, like, that's miserable. I don't want to do that. I don't want to sit in a hot college dorm room with no air conditioning ever again. Like, that's not fun.
Why the hatred for the should word?
Should, because you shouldn't do anything. You want to do something, you can do something. But why should you do something? I don't know.
No.
I just think it's an annoying
Well, I guess you
word
should
that
do
likes
it if you want to do it.
Yeah, you should do it if you want to do it, maybe, but then you just want to do it.
Yeah.
I am doing it because I want to do it. And the should can just psychologically be an annoying word. And then Zach and I went on holiday to Mallorca in March, and I was chasing some QOMs, and I was like, oh, Marvin Garcia has blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, Zach's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm really motivated by seeing if I can be at these QOMs, of these climbs in
Brilliant.
Mallorca.
Was it Sacalobra or what was it?
Oh, I don't even remember. We were staying in Soya, so all the climbs.
I mean, if it was a climb in Mallorca, yeah.
Around
And Mavi Garcia had it.
I mean, Zach and I are on a dorky cycling honeymoon couple situation, and I'm out there trying to chase down QOMs.
Do I seem to remember your flight was cancelled or delayed or something there or back?
So sad on the way back. All of Germany was on strike, so we had to stay another 5 days.
I was going to ask you, did a cancelled flight home not like taper the ambitions of a return? But I mean, if you get stuck for an extra 5 days in Mallorca, that's probably only going to help motivate you back.
It was so fun. And then I actually thought, oh, maybe I'll do mountain bike. I actually thought I'll get into mountain bike. I registered for some hard mountain bike racing in the US. Mountain bike was definitely motivating me more than any gravel event, and I was training pretty hard for it, excited for some bigger races that we had. Showed up to the race, was pre-riding for approximately 3 minutes before I decided to follow my lovely husband off a drop that was a bit too big, fell on my shoulder and had a grade 3 shoulder AC joint shoulder separation, and that took me off the bike for a while. And then whilst I was recovering and still motivated to ride on a peak-to-peak highway with a shoulder that you shouldn't have been riding.
You ever heard of indoor trainers?
Oh, I hate the trainers so much. So I was still motivated to train. And yeah, I think through that, I was just like, well, everyone, all my mountain bike friends were telling me, Ruth, everybody crashes really badly, and especially this track in Fayetteville, everybody does. It's not a big deal. Just keep going. And then I was like, if I'm going to try this hard to do bike racing, then why don't I just do bike racing how I know how to do bike racing? And maybe I'll ride mountain bikes again in the future. Or I know I'll always ride a mountain bike. I love riding a mountain bike, racing a mountain bike. But I think from there, all of that motivation that I had right, and then you just show up to your race, don't even get to race, and then you're at home with a busted shoulder. I think from that point, I just thought about road even more.
You tried gravel, you tried mountain bike then. Do you think you were just looking for a way to scratch that competitive itch, and really it was road is the only way you can do that?
I think I was definitely the second year. The first year, I don't want to understate the amount that I know I needed to stop and take a break. And then the first year I was doing some gravel racing, I didn't really have the competitive itch at all. I found it really hard to be competitive actually in gravel racing because I thought it was so stupid, and I don't mean that to be like I don't know, disrespectful for anybody that does really love gravel racing, because I think it has its place and it's really growing as a sport. But I think until they decide whether it's this participation event or a pro event, then I have a hard time finding where I kind of belonged in there, because everyone told me, oh, Ruth, it's really fun. You know, we stop for grilled cheese sandwiches and we have a great time, and you get in there and it's freaking cutthroat and hard as shit for like 8 hours. And no one told me that, and I was not mentally prepared. So the gravel was more just a segue, because I had told Trek that I might be interested in doing something like Leadville, because that was just an event that I'd never been able to do before, and I just thought, oh, it'd be cool to go. And Trek came to me and said, oh, you know, if you want to do some gravel racing, then maybe we can, you know, help support you in that way. And I told them about mountain bike, and they were like, not really, I'm not interested. And then thankfully to me, actually, the Life Time Grand Prix started that year, and they included 3 mountain bike races in the series. So then I applied for the series, got accepted, and then I was like, Trek,
I need a mountain
bike. So that's kind of how gravel came around more than anything. I think I always said I would never do Unbound, and I have participated in Unbound once, but I only made it 100 miles out of the 200. So it's just not sure it's ever going to be for me.
I mean, yeah, each to their own.
Yeah.
That's and we have to do. I think probably what you were hyper aware of coming out of road was that you had to do what was going to make you happy.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. I regret to inform you that, well, if you're hearing this, this is the end of the episode for you. If you remember, you could get the entire thing over on the Escape Collective members feed. There are instructions for how to get that feed once you sign up, but you're listening to the free feed, and so this episode cuts off right here. We hope you did enjoy it, what you got of it, and we hope that you sign up and get the whole thing. Thanks for listening.